Did it give you an indication that recording is
Yep.
great?
I suppose we could always start, and when Kristen gets here, we don't have to go in that particular order, our very scientifically chosen order. All right. Yeah, I suppose everybody's busy, so we probably don't want to wait too long to kind of get going here. And we also want to make sure we have enough time for the two discussions we want to have, really. The discussion about the presentations as well as the best practices manual. So I guess, yeah, let's get going. Welcome, everybody. Smallish group today, but that's okay. That's the nice thing about this particular program and in this network is that we can post all of our presentations for consumption later, and especially during the field season. And I know that for some of you, this is still field season, even us in Minnesota. So I appreciate everybody. We appreciate everybody that is able to make it out here, especially our presenters. So today we really have the dual goals in mind. We wanted to have presentations and a pretty good discussion on data management issues, data and data management. And then we want to slide into our best practices manual, talking a little bit about what we've envisioned that is, both as sort of an overall group and as the folks on this sort of leadership organizing group. And start to talk about what that would look like and how that may evolve or develop and evolve. So yeah, it's a lot of things to kind of get through in an hour and a half, but hopefully we'll be able to do that efficiently and entertainingly. We've got 4 presentations today about data management in their various forms, and that was kind of all the guidance we gave the presenters on what this was going to be about. We really try to grab 4 different programs covering a pretty good variety of stakeholders and sort of scope. That way we would hopefully get something that's a little bit applicable to anybody who might be coming to this program, new or advanced. We've got there are going to be about 5-10 minutes each, so they're going to be pretty fast, and we imagine there's going to be a lot of questions. We hope there's going to be a lot of questions, but I think what we're going to try to do today is limit the immediate questions to questions that are clarification in nature. So when one speaker gets done, if you have something that there was something on a slide that you needed clarification on, for example, go ahead and we'll look for raised hands after that, but kind of reserve our greater discussion questions until after all 4 have gone. That doesn't always work for me. I like to talk right away when I can. So for those of us that are like that, that's what the chat's for. You can enter in questions there. That way we can remember those and come back to them later on. We don't want to ignore your questions by any means. Let's see. Was there anything else that we were going to say about that? Does anybody else remember anything? Or did that cover? Okay. All right. Yep. And then we'll do those discussions. We'll have that discussion and then slide into the best practices manual. And try to wrap it up in an hour and a half to get everybody back to their lives. Okay, so is Kristen here yet?
I don't see Kristen on.
Okay. Then hopefully, I think Michelle is next because alphabetically, Colorado comes next. That's how we did it. Surprise. So hopefully, Michelle, if you're ready, that's okay. You can take it away.
Unmute. Okay. So I don't know. Can people see a slideshow and not my notes? Okay, good. Yeah. So I'm Michelle from the Denver Botanic Gardens. I focus on population biology research. So I go and do demographics mostly. I included in the title frame my coworker Rick Levy, who we are super lucky to have a data manager on staff. And that's in my tenure pretty recent. So I appreciate him very much. So he's integral to our data management and security and quality. We, being a public garden, have the mission of connecting people with plants. So we really have an obligation to have our data be open and accessible to the public, to scientific community, to everyone. So we collect 4 main types of data: demographic data, my baby, to inform plant conservation. We collect occurrence data that includes the spatial information and habitat information, species abundance, species ID that go along with our herbarium specimens, our tissue collections that go towards like the Global Genome Initiative or population genetic studies, and our XE2 seed conservation collections. We collect ecological data for restoration and habitat management studies, and we collect genetic sequence data for population genetic studies and phylogenies. Our mission at the gardens is to connect people with plants. We have a big focus on outreach through citizen scientists and training future scientists, so a grad school program students. And we work really hard to keep both our volunteers, our staff, and our data safe. And the first thing that involves is permits. And we work primarily on federal and state lands. So we have federal and state permits. On the off occasions that we are working on private lands, we have forms that we complete to get permission before doing work with private landowners. And the permits both ensure that we have safe access to the sites and ensure that we have the proper documentation that we can then store and share data and tissue moving forward. So we also need to keep the location of the rare plants and listed species secure, and we do that through confidentiality agreements. That's because we have data from the Heritage Program about locations of all the plants. So we have all our volunteers sign confidentiality agreements, but we also follow the restrictions of label information in Symbiota of all our herbarium specimens, that we can always share location information, label data upon request, but that's protected. And then we keep all our data that comes in, our database is secure. So we use, we're a public garden, so we like all the free and when available, the open source databases and data control things. So we use a MySQL database that allows us to have user administrative levels, so we can assign users that they have permissions to allow or disallow, create, update, and delete privileges, so we don't accidentally lose some of our data. This is accessible from inside the gardens, or if you're on site or through VPN, through password protected PHP MyAdmin interface. We back up copies of our MySQL database once a month by Rick, by our data manager. And then the entire server at the gardens is backed up on a weekly basis by an automated process through the IT department here. We keep the code that we use to analyze our data secure and version controlled through GitHub. And then the more costly but we use ArcGIS, so we have ArcGIS Online. That is a software as a service. So it's certified compliant with the highest independent international industry accepted privacy standards, which was what Rick pulled from the internet to describe how that helps with security. So we need proper security of the data because we need to be able to share our data. And so we disseminate our data through publications, through our collections, and through like gray literature, so through reporting. All the data is meant to go into Symbiota, so it needs to be compliant with Darwin Core, or it needs to be ready for analyses, or ready to go onto the herbarium labels or into GenBank, or to submit as an element occurrence record. So it really matters that all this data coming in is correct. And that brings us to the quality of data. So quality starts with good management. And first, we need to collect the data that's in a way that it'll meet the end goals. And so we have quality controls that are equally important for both our citizen and our staff scientists. Like we all need this help to collect quality data. So if we're starting a new project with new data, we develop a workflow. First, we discuss what's the data that we need to collect with Rick, with our data manager. And then he helps figure out how to set up a survey 123 form to capture it efficiently and accurately. And then we talk about what does the data need to look like coming out? So is it going to a label? Is it going to analyses or reporting? Figure out all the relational tables needed to get the data in the format that we need to analyze and to collect. So for specimen and sample collections, we do use survey 123 to create data collection forms using controlled vocabulary in the form of check boxes and autocomplete fields to make the data consistent and to reduce error. Once the data is recorded and exported from ArcGIS, it's reviewed by whoever collected it, by Rick, our data manager, and then it's run through Python scripts that he wrote to format the data for upload and check scientific names for synonymy and spelling errors. So we kind of have this nice workflow. What's a little different for my demographic data is that I have an additional custom-built web app that took us from using Microsoft Access databases ages ago to MySQL. And the web app formats the data sheets so I can track individual plants over time, see their past performance when I'm taking the current year's data. And then I can enter the data into a CSV that's in the same format as the data sheets, as the handwritten data sheets, to reduce error, and directly upload it through the web app that automates the upload to the MySQL databases. So to all the correct relational tables. From the web app, I can export data to R for analyses, or I can directly export data from the MySQL database if needed. And we currently still work on paper because all of our work, almost all of our work is out where we may not have cell service. So it's not like you're collecting. I'm still nervous about collecting data on a tablet, on a survey 123, because I'm afraid that all this data will go in and then somehow it'll crash and be lost. So I still prefer to collect on paper for security. But I do have plans, because I think it's probably okay to move towards digital collection so I can have volunteers using their own devices in addition to our tablets. I have from the paper data quality checks when I'm entering from paper to Excel, quality checks after it's been exported to R and I can visualize the data and correct it in the MySQL database. So in general, our data management plan is how we're getting good security and quality. So we plan ahead with a database for each type. So where's it going to go? Is it ArcGIS, MySQL? Is there cost involved? That needs to be written into any grant of any new project. We develop the data sheets, whether it's digital or paper, that'll make the data collection, storage, and analysis or dissemination efficient. So like for analysis, you want a long format, but in data collection, you want it wide, right? So you have to figure out where you're going to format and keep that all aligned. We need to save the data, back up the raw data. So as soon as you're back in cell service, right, getting that uploaded, and then it gets into the process of keeping that raw data, acknowledging that mistakes happen. So we need to do all those quality checks that might have escaped the management plans so that we can avoid most mistakes. And then we get the data into a secure database. And that's Rick there being very helpful and excited about data. But the gardens, that Rick really pushes us to be data heroes, and even made this fun logo where we want to collect all the necessary data, control quality through good management, and make all the data accessible. And really we want to do this because this accessibility leads to like other cool studies and projects that weren't the original intent of the data. So for instance, we had a botanical illustration series come through that illustrated a bunch of our rare and listed species from our herbarium specimens. And we think it's important that we collect kind of as much data as possible, make sure it's accessible for future studies that would be beyond the original intent of the data. I can share, I'll ask, I'm sure I can share the data hero sticker label because everyone should be data heroes.
All right. Does anybody have any other questions, quick questions here for Michelle? That was pretty great, Michelle. I'm glad we're recording that because that was a lot. You guys are doing a lot. That's a lot of information. Oh, Micah.
Thanks. Michelle, I was curious, you mentioned a number of the checks and validation you have. Are there any checks to confirm the ID of the species when it's an observation by a volunteer observer? Or is it mainly like making sure they're not reporting 1 million plants or that their location is out in the Atlantic?
Right. Well, we are moving towards, using iNaturalist for some of the just photographic ID of plant, but we tend pretty much all our work, we're collecting a specimen. So then the specimens come in, and then we have an herbarium. So we have the whole process of double checking and the curation of, do we know what it is that we have collected? For seed, we send people out to do seed surveys. So yeah, I mean, a lot of that isn't, it would be we have projects set up in iNat that then folks can go through and as best as possible, check the ID, but mostly we would like to have a specimen with anything so that we can actually go back and say, yes, this is what we think you're doing. But right, for like the listed species that you can't have a volunteer make a collection. Yes, that is a good question, and we work at it, but
I can go now. Michelle, so I apologize. I had to take a phone call at one point in the beginning of your presentation, so I missed the first part, but I know that you were talking about using Esri products. I think was it Survey 123. And then I kind of joined what you were talking about doing the demographic stuff. So do you, for some of the stuff, do you use Esri, and for the stuff that you do for demography, you use a different tool?
Yeah, demography started well before we purchased the ArcGIS, Esri tools. So we're still trying to bring me into the future where I'm willing and confident that I can use Survey 123 for my demographic data. So I have not yet, but that's because we had the whole process of, we were using Access, Microsoft Access, which is poopy. So great that we moved beyond that. my skills at the time in R weren't great enough that I could do all the controls that I may have wanted. So then we have a custom built web app that kind of formats things and gets it to where, because I'm tracking individuals with my demography for most of my studies. So right, I need to change the format, between the data sheets and the data upload
Right.
and then analysis.
Yeah. So do you plan to eventually migrate that to Esri?
Yes, that's the goal. So that's waiting on our data manager, Rick, being able to figure out how to do that in Survey 123, which he's close. he's built up his skills. So for now, yes. But I mean, that's maybe a question for all you guys. Like it worries me. I mean, I know I could like drop my papers in the water and lose all my raw data, but it worries me a lot to take tablets out and collect all my data. Because what if I lose? I mean, I don't have any connectivity when I'm collecting it. So what if somehow between the time that I've collected it on this little machine and it dies, and then I guess, I don't know.
Well, if you plan ahead, you can still upload your data without being connected, because you can have those forms offline. But I still find that it's kind of a pain to enter all the data into a tablet rather than on paper.
Yeah. I feel like it's faster and easier, and I also worry about I can poke a mistake quicker than I can maybe, if I'm writing, I know I'm writing a 3 or I don't know.
Yeah. Well, for me, I've run out of batteries before even having backup batteries, or like it overheats and I can't turn it back on, or things like that.
Right. I don't really see myself ever going out without backup paper copies, even if my intent is to collect the data on a tablet.
Well, I asked because we're in the process. So we've started using Esri for a lot of like management activities, but I haven't really used it much for any monitoring kind of activities because it doesn't seem as ideal, but I haven't used it much. So we're having a meeting next week actually to talk about whether or not we can merge all that together. So I was just curious.
Yeah. We would like to move that way, regardless of how hesitant I am, but it'll have to wait on our help getting the Survey 123 form set up the way I want it.
All right. Well, I'm sure we'll talk about this. I'm sure this won't be the last time we talk about Survey 123 and INET and all that, and tablets. That's an issue for us too. Okay, so is Kristen here yet? Let's see. Doesn't look like it. Okay, so then who was next here? Cheyenne with Pennsylvania. Are you ready to go, Cheyenne?
Yeah, let me share my screen. Do y'all see my slides, not my notes? Perfect. I will, I guess, give the disclaimer that my slides are not nearly as pretty as Michelle's. I had a lot of presentations this past month, and I have another one this weekend. So these are like my ugliest, most boring slides, and I'm sorry, you all. I tried to keep it brief, mostly because we're a pretty new program. So the PPCA started in 2018, but I started only a year and a half ago. So we're kind of reformatting and working out new things. So I try to give lots of disclaimers through here that, this is not by no means the best way to do anything. It's just the way that things are being done. And I'm happy to take suggestions, or I'm excited to hear what other folks are doing. So first I wanted to just tell folks where our data lives. And that will kind of give you context for what we're doing with it too. So for folks that are familiar with heritage, PPCA is tied in with our Pennsylvania Natural Heritage Program. And so we do work off of EO data. So we do have all of our data in biotics. Whenever we go out and check on plants, that updates the EOs. But Pennsylvania Heritage has this thing called FIND. And it's really cool, but also can be a little tedious. So it's based in ArcGIS, and it's basically the go-between between our field people and biotics. So we don't actually put anything into biotics. We put everything into Find, and our data managers move things from Find into biotics. So Find is really flexible, which is great, but it's also makes things harder sometimes. So we do use iPads in the field often. So you can make an observation and Find, tie it to an EO, but Find has something like over 100 fields now, and not all of them are related to plants either. So like sometimes there's stuff that mammalogists use that we just ignore. And whenever you're making an observation, it can be really tedious to scroll through all those options. So Find is really cool, but it's also a little overwhelming sometimes. And so that's like our heritage part of things. And then because I run the PPCA, we do a lot of stewardship and management, and I talk a lot with land managers like our game commission and our state parks. And so for them, they don't really work in Find or biotics like I do. So we kind of go old fashioned with just shared folders and teams. And that's where we're living right now. And so this is like my goal workflow. I don't know if this is actually how we're doing things well, but this is how it's working right now. So we do use Survey 123 often. We don't do it all the time for all the species, but I have been working on species specific surveys, especially for things that have more detailed monitoring, like specific demographic monitoring for our Isotria medialoides, and other plants that just we have extra monitoring built in other than just counts. And then that goes into Find and biotics and the normal data management sort of workflow. But then also Survey 123 can go into Excel, and then that kind of splits off into the species folders that we maintain, and then data analysis, which then also goes into species folders. So who needs to get the data? The Natural Heritage Program, that's that side. The data managers, environmental reviewers, biotics, Find. That's kind of like how things have always been. It's a well-oiled machine over there. And then over here, that's like my part of things, less well-oiled, but we're working on it. So the folks that need that data are land managers, our botanists, and our collaborators. So we do try to collaborate a lot with folks. So we have worked with graduate students before, universities, land managers, like I said, so like our game commission, our state parks. And so we want to be able to give them information that's useful to them and not just, the classic biotics data element occurrences, because that doesn't mean a whole lot to them sometimes, and it's tedious to look through. So I'm going to kind of show you what our species folder looks like. And this is just like the inner workings of my mind. So this slide might not make any sense. But we can talk about it. So one of the big things that I have been trying to push is recovery plans, sort of like based on our U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service recovery plans. So within a folder, we have two versions of a recovery plan, one with sensitive information, one without sensitive information, because I do find that like our land managers are often interested. They might not actually read the recovery plan, but it's just nice to offer it to them, So while they don't need all the element occurrence data for a rare species, they sometimes want to see that species status assessment and our recovery implementation strategies that we've been working on, just so they have a full picture, have the option to look at that full picture. And then I just have these other documents that sort of live in these folders, and generally I'll share them with the folks that are kind of on our species teams. And that includes like management documents that we've made for land managers, so things to give park managers, and those sort of live as static documents. Monitoring data, obviously not static, gets updated periodically. Field reports, so that could be, someone's written up notes that they just like wanted to make sure live in perpetuity somewhere, or could be integrated into the recovery plan later, so those live in there. And any other info that our botanists think is like really important that, folks should have access to. So it's kind of a hub of important things, some of it organized, some of it less organized. And I periodically go in there and like try to make things a little better. And a side that I need to mention, our heritage botanists want a database. So if anyone in heritage has some, you know, experience trying to build like a botany database. Michelle kind of talked about their database. They really want like a bigger, better way to manage our plant information. So things like phenology, you know, natural history information, things that we don't put into biotics, kind of those things that we've been shoving into find, things that are not easily searchable in biotics. And again, with the consistency of like terminology, you know, there's lots of ways to say, you know, stems or clumps or combs or whatever, and just making sure we have consistency in those sorts of things. So if anyone wants to talk about databases, I would be remiss if I didn't mention this deep desire of our botanists. And then I just wanted to touch on data security. Where does our data live? It lives in our state files. So because I work for DCNR, which is a state agency, it's in a state system, which means it's pretty secure for the most part, but that can also be really bad sometimes because it can be difficult to share even outside of the state. So pros and cons. We're trying to figure out like a good way to have everything live in these folders, and then those folders be easily shared with folks where they don't like lose access and links break and things. So that's why we use Teams sometimes. Sometimes Teams is a little easier, but that's not necessarily as permanent of a storage system as OneDrive and files. And then occurrence data, if you want just EO data, that is with our data management. So that's not my thing, but I can definitely direct people there whenever they want just occurrence data. That's way easier for me to say, email Susan and sign the data agreement and she'll get you your data. Other notes, we do have data security agreements. We haven't started engaging a lot of volunteers yet, but actually I'm going to the Pennsylvania Master Naturalist meeting this weekend where I'm gonna recruit like my first volunteers, I hope. So we do have data security agreements that we use for some of the volunteers that our botanists work pretty closely with, which is just a handful of folks. So we've adapted those for the PPCA. But we also want to trust good intentions too. I know it can be really difficult sometimes, especially when you're working with really rare species, but I did want to note that like we're working with master naturalists, which is a select group of folks that we're trying to trust good intentions there too. And we're still working out all the kinks, like I said. So that is another mention of that. And that's all I had prepared. That's my email if folks have questions or comments for after this, but I just wanted to give like a brief overview of what we're doing right now. And if folks have suggestions or questions, I am happy to take them. Sharing.
Thanks, Cheyenne.
Yeah.
Also very interesting. I'm seeing a theme, survey 1, 2, 3. All right, well, that's good. Okay, so it looks like, are there any questions? Sorry.
So your botanists that want the other database, is that too, it sounds like they want to like have a way to organize all the other stuff that you throw in a file, right? To like track what all that, is that what, I mean, beyond phenology and other data, it kind of sounds like it would be like all that other stuff, a way to not just have it all thrown in a file, but have it be searchable, the information. Is that what they want? Okay.
Right. And I think different botanists have different dreams about it, but I think like the main thing is that they want a place where all of that can live and it's not just going to be in our find database. So
Cheyenne, I would recommend reaching out to Bob Wernerl, who I'm not sure if he's been on any meetings recently, with Massachusetts Natural Heritage, because they just overhauled their data system. They have the Massachusetts Endangered Species Act, so they have a lot of rigorous requirements. And they just created a new system called Heritage Hub that I think was an internal system, but you could take a look and see if they could connect you with their information manager, who might be able to give you some guidance.
that's a good note, Micah. A lot of our botanists are friends with Bob, so I can point them his way.
Awesome, thank you.
I just have a question for Cheyenne. I just wonder, like, how it seems like there might be a common need for heritage to have like a database in addition to biotics, or that feeds certain information and is tied to biotics, but holds more. So yeah, I would love to know like how customizable biotics is, or if it's possible to, you know, work with folks to
Right.
develop biotics into that more, you know,
Right. Yeah, I think that's
database. Yeah.
I think that's a really good conversation to have, because we've talked about like reintroductions and translocations with like the CPC database for that. And there's not really a way to like link that up with biotics, but it would be really cool if there was, or a way to track that sort of stuff in biotics. So those are other conversations we've been having with data management, of like consistency of tracking things like that.
Thanks.
All right. I don't know if you all of you caught this in chat, but there's a link Janelle put out that is pretty great about data recovery for Survey 123. So that we want to make sure we capture that link for sure. Okay, so Kristen is here. Kristen, are you ready to go, or would you like a little bit of time to gather yourself?
Yeah, hi, appreciate that. Apologies, I did a classic failed to account for a time difference or a time zone difference issue with this meeting. So apologies for my tardiness, but I am ready. And I just want to note too that on top of missing the time zone difference, I have a lot of construction going on in my house today. So I have one screen and it's not my normal setup. So please just bear with me, but yeah, thanks. Okay, so let me get my presentation going here. I think I have to share this screen with all your faces on it, because again, I only have one screen. So sorry about that for a second, but I'll get my presentation up quickly so you don't have to look at yourselves in mirror for too long. Okay, how are we looking? Great. All right. And I'm a little sad that I missed some of what has already been presented on. I think there's going to be a theme here. I appreciate everything that I just heard at the tail end of that presentation, but yeah, so I work in the rare plant program for the California Native Plant Society, and I'm just going to dive right in here. And what I'm going to start with, that I think we all deal with in differing degrees, but is definitely one of our primary challenges, is this concept of scale. And then I'm going to go through I want to provide just a little context for what our setup is, and then I'll go through my good, bad, and ugly, or really I'm just calling my bad and my ugly all in one challenging group. So maybe some of you know this, maybe some of you don't. I actually haven't been able to attend one of these meetings yet because I've had scheduling conflicts. So this is my first one, but you know, as California Native Plant Society, we manage rare plant data for the entire state of California, and it's a significant and challenging scale. So I just have a couple quick metrics here to provide that context. We track a little more than 2,400 rare plant taxa statewide, and that amounts to nearly 47,000 individual occurrences, or, you know, occurrences is kind of our term for populations. And this map here is just a nice little super high level output, or a snapshot of what those occurrences look like mapped across the state. So it's a lot, and, you know, that just sets the stage to make the point that really just scale. This amount of data that we're managing and the geographic area that we're managing is one of our biggest challenges. And so our setup, I just wanted to make sure to provide this context, because it is an important component of like how we deal with these things, data management and security and all of that. And I'm not sure how familiar this group is with our setup, but our statewide heritage program is called the California Natural Diversity Database, or CNDDB. I always find that acronym to be very funny because it's almost as much of a mouthful to say as just the whole thing. But the CNDDB is our statewide heritage database. or, natural heritage program. And of course, not just for plants, but for wildlife and other things as well. And it's managed by our state agency, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And we have this really, really long-standing cooperative agreement with CDFW at CNPS that we work very closely with their staff in the sort of the natural heritage department at CDFW. And the idea is that it's this really like give and take relationship where we're contributing data directly to the natural heritage database to help them like have current and excellent data about rare plants across the state. And we're also like promoting the contribution of data to that database to other people. And then we get free and open access to all of that data. And so that's sort of our longstanding cooperative agreement with them. And all of that to say that we don't manage our own database of statewide rare plant data at CNPS. And so there are good things and challenging things with that setup. It is highly secure. The state has a paid subscription-based login in order to be able to access that data. And that is, for all of the reasons you would guess, it's really just security, data security about our most, sensitive species across the state. And the idea is basically that for the most part, agencies and consultants, like private consultants, are the folks that really need access to the detailed information associated with all of this spatial data, and that they can afford these subscriptions. And so they buy these subscriptions and then their staff gets access to it, but that, it's keeping it secure from just like broad, free, open access. Also on my sort of list of pros here is that we are not responsible for database upkeep and management, which is very time consuming. And I think that's maybe part of what was being alluded to in that last presentation, is just like building a database, building the structure and the architecture of that database. Like all of that's really just like challenging and time consuming. And at the end of the day, we're a bunch of botanists, so we don't have to do that. And then also the very time consuming aspect of like QA and QC for all of the data that comes in is something that the state handles, because ultimately it's their database. And then, as I've already mentioned, not only do we get access to that data, but we can share the data either sort of at large or sort of piecemeal wise as we determine appropriate with volunteers. And often what that looks like is with chapters. So we have a pretty big staff of a little more than 50 right now, but we also have 36 chapters that are, for the most part, geographically based and spread across the state. And so if we have really dedicated chapter volunteers that want to do, rare plant surveys and rare plant work and help contribute data, we can make data from the natural heritage database, for research purposes and figuring out where things occur. We can make that information available to them. But the flip side of that coin, of course, is that we need to identify and vet and train those volunteers. One, to make sure that, just that they're using the data for good purposes, and that then they are also well trained enough to be collecting good data that is going to go back and feed back into the natural heritage database. Also, and this is going to kind of get into the crux of like my biggest struggles and challenges, just like mentally, but also like very literally with this setup, is the data submission process is determined by the state, right? It's their database. And as with government things, it's a little archaic and not like people's preferred sort of activity to do on their free time is to be doing this like really clunky, archaic data collection process. So they do have just like PDF forms that you can print out and fill out in the field. And oftentimes those are just getting like scanned or photographed and sent to either CNPS or CDFW directly. The better way to do it is they actually have like an online portal where you can submit data, and you can either, take their paper data form and then transcribe it into that portal, or you can just take notes in a notebook or whatever and then transcribe your data into that portal. But it is behind a login. That's a free login, so it's not part of the paid subscription login, so you can get a free account. But even just that is like a little bit clunky, kind of like a typical government system. And it's like not a super user-friendly portal, I will say. And so all of that to say, I'm going to kind of jump to my last bullet here, is that there's real competition with people's time and attention for this kind of work with other much more easy to use platforms and open access platforms. And the biggest thing is that, if people are contributing data to the CNDDB, they then can't really very readily go then interact with and manage their own data. Like they can, and they can go back to their login and all of their submissions are listed there, but it's not this nice, mapped thing where they can see oh, look at all these, things I've submitted to the CNDDB mapped on a map. And it's not this nice way to interact with even with your own data, leave alone other people's data, in the way, say, you can do on iNaturalist, which I assume most of you are familiar with. And then, CalFlora is a California specific resource that also allows users to submit data. It's open access. The individual users can determine whether or not to obscure locality information. And then you can log in and interact with not only your own data, but other users' data. And that's just preferred by people. But none of those systems are collecting the amount of information that we would really want. It's really just a point on a map, right? It's not population information or phenology information or threats and all of that kind of stuff. And it's certainly not tracking things like volunteer hours, which we would want to keep track of, ideally. So all of those drawbacks kind of go hand in hand. Oh, and I didn't even realize I have I was trying to figure out where it fits best, but I have a redundant bullet point here about the competition with those other platforms. And if you use iNaturalist for rare plant or rare, any kind of listed species observations, that data automatically gets obscured. And their policy is that you have to get permission one at a time from individual observers if you want to be able to pull that data into a CNDDB or any kind of other database. And that is just not very feasible. And so then the other struggle, and this, again, it all ties together, but the other big struggle is that because of our scale issue, our state has a huge and pretty long-standing backlog that they did just get a bunch of funding, and they keep saying they're going to actually eliminate that backlog in the foreseeable future. But it has been a very, very long-standing backlog where I'll just use a personal example. I was a private consultant for many years, and I've submitted data to the CNDDB more than a decade ago that has yet to show up in the online viewable information. And it's just buried in their backlog somewhere. And that's just another reason why it makes it really hard and impossible to interact with your data in a meaningful way. And then the other key there for CNPS as an organization is, ultimately that is the data for the state. And we're using that to set our priorities. And if it's really outdated, of course, we're constantly having to do a whole bunch of extra work and filtering and cross-referencing in order to feel like we're somewhere close to having current information to direct our priorities. And so then I just wanted to try and tie all that together to note that as CNPS, our primary sort of volunteer community science program that we've been leading for rare plant data collection and rare plant monitoring for a number of years is currently called the Rare Plant Treasure Hunt. We might be renaming it, we might be keeping the name, but we are going to try to take on some structural changes to that program where it's not so held by staff to do all of the work, all of the volunteer coordination, all of the setup statewide, right? Because the reality is that even a really, really great botanist isn't necessarily an expert at the local level that we need to be able to to be directing priorities and collecting really good data. So a couple of the big things are that we want to sort of delegate out that logistics and coordination responsibility to our chapters. We have rare plant chairs on the boards of most of our chapters, and we're going to try to delegate that out with their support. We're in the process of working it out right now. And then this circles all the way back to, in order to make that feasible for them, just at the state level, the staff, we at least have to implement some support and structure and ensure that there's a process, like a clean process for entering and submitting data. And my sort of question and where I think it's going to go is like, is Survey 123 the right platform for that? I like it because it has the online data entry interface that makes it really easy for volunteers to basically, like, maybe we set up a free login and some space where you can easily enter your data that will ultimately be going to the CDDB, but this is like an interim step that kind of CNPS can play a role where this is like a much easier data gathering hub. And perhaps there's like a nicer way for users to be interacting with their own data and hopefully encouraging them to participate more. I didn't time myself. I'm probably way over. So, and that's my last slide. I realized I didn't put my email on here, but I could put it in the chat. And anyway, yeah, sorry for sliding in late and just zooming through this.
No need to apologize. That's great. Thanks, Kristen.
Yeah,
a lot to think about. That's a very large scale.
It's a very large scale.
Yeah. But that's interesting. A lot of things to think about for sure. Okay, any questions?
I had one just about the state backlog. Have you approached the state to see if they're looking for volunteers? We had a similar issue with our own data where we had a 30-year backlog in paper documents and PDFs, and actually was surprised by the response of our volunteers who were willing, as long as it was digitized, to actually go through and transcribe data. Especially thinking about opportunities for people who may not be able to get out into the field. It actually diversified our opportunities. Now, this is different because we controlled the data and had it in-house versus asking the state to give access to volunteers that you manage. But I wasn't sure if that was something you had thought about approaching them with.
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate that suggestion, Micah. I know that they're well aware of it, right? They don't have blinders on. They get it. They get that it's a problem and it's a major complaint. And my understanding is that it's their stance that they just don't really see it as a volunteer activity. And I don't know if that's data sensitivity or just capacity of the staff to like do training and oversight, which is this whole other like, other time commitment that you have to then insert into of course, the ultimate issue was just like time, right? They didn't have enough staff with enough time to deal with the backlog. But this new funding that they've just received resulted in a bunch of hiring. And it's my understanding that they are going to have a whole like small army of staff that is going to be dedicated to dealing with the backlog now. So yes and no, like I've thought of it, but I don't think that they were wanting to go that route.
Hopefully it gets resolved soon.
Hopefully.
Kristen, I had a question about what is the state's database Biotics, or what are they using?
It is not Biotics. It's their own custom thing that they've built. So they have kind of like a two-part thing that goes hand in hand. They call it RareFind 5, or RareFind is the name of it. And I think they've literally had like 5 versions of it. And then actually, I don't even know if that's accurate. So RareFind is where you can query the data if you have a paid subscription, and then they have like, it links to a map function called BIOS. But yeah, I mean, it's like a custom system is the answer that they had built however many years ago.
All right, thank you. So we've got
thanks.
one more. Kevin.
Yeah.
Kevin, you are next from Wisconsin. Yeah, take it away.
Cool. Can you see my screen? Yeah, okay. Okay, so it's similar to how other people have presented. Here's an overview of our workflow. I work with the Wisconsin Heritage Program, which is within the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. So yeah, the volunteers collect the data using either iNaturalist or Survey 123, or what I might call loose forms, whether it's digital PDFs or our old hard copy forms or just emails. They submit that to us. The data then goes through like a series of databases, an in-house GIS database, geodatabase, and then biotics. And then we share that data back out with volunteers through a web tool made with R that volunteers can then use to sign up for more surveys. So let's go through that. I
Hey,
won't get,
Kevin,
yeah.
sorry to interrupt. Could you put your presentation in like
Oh.
the slideshow mode?
Oh, yeah. Huh. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Thanks.
Sorry. Yeah. Thanks for letting me know. Okay, so yeah, I won't get into much of the details. I think we're all familiar with iNaturalist. And I gave a presentation last winter on how we use iNaturalist with a project and field forms to get more precise data. We also use Survey 123, which I think has been mentioned in all the other presentations. And then, like I said, some volunteers still like to use the paper forms that they'll just mail us, or they'll use digital PDFs and email us those, or just send us like comments and emails. So iNaturalist and Survey 123 are the way most of our data come in, but we do get some other people that use other sources. Once we get that data, it first comes into this observational database that we've created in ArcMap, in part because of what Kristen was just talking about. California isn't the only one with a backlog. We have a backlog too. And so in order to still get access to some of that data before it's entered in biotics, we have our own in-house observational database. So it doesn't really have much information associated with each record, basically just the observer, the species, the date, and then of course the location. So that's the map on the left. Once we take those records out of the observational database and enter them into biotics, you get the map on the right. Actually, the map on the right is filtered a little further because the surveys, the EOs, the populations, whatever you want to call them, that we offer to volunteers isn't the full array of EOs from biotics. So we're only focusing on, we use a few different filters. So species that have been observed in the last 40 years, populations that or populations that have been observed in the last 40 years, populations that we have reasonably precise locational information on. So like ideally GPS coordinates, but maybe like roughly with a precision of about 40 acres. And then populations that are on public land, because those are, we just don't have to jump through that extra hoop of trying to figure out who the landowner is and what their contact information is and getting their permission and all that kind of stuff. So it still ends up being about 3,000 populations that are kind of our survey window or survey world options for the volunteers. And that's the map on the right. From that list of about 3,000 populations, the rare plant populations that volunteers can look for, we share that back out using Shiny, which is a package in R, to create this web tool called the Rare Plant Finder. So we put this on our program website. So this is available to anyone in the public, whether you're a volunteer with the program or not. It's not like behind a login or anything. And so when a volunteer wants to sign up for a survey, they go onto the Rare Plant Finder and they zoom into wherever they want to look for their rare plant, and they can see what the options are. And so here's an example. They zoom in to a population near Eau Claire, which is in western Wisconsin. And they see, oh, there's this muskroot population that's known from the Eau Claire area. I'll talk in a second about precise that location on this rare plant finder is, but and then they'll email us and say like, hey, I see there's a musk root population near Eau Claire. Can I search for it? Now, if they don't, maybe they don't know what musk root is. They're not, an expert botanist. And so they're like, oh, this is interesting. I've never heard of this plant. Is this something I can identify or feel comfortable searching for? That there's a hyperlink that takes them to a profile page about the species. So it can give them a sense of like, oh yeah, okay, this is something I think I can identify. It's, for example, it's not a sedge or it's not an aquatic plant that is a little more difficult. And so they can the point is that they can self-select how they sign up for surveys, things that they feel comfortable looking for. But in order to get them to find this stuff, go out on these surveys by themselves, we have to supply them with data, maps, and other tabular data to help them actually locate this stuff. But we have 3,000 populations. So creating a topo map and an aerial map for each of these 3,000 populations would be really tedious. So I wanted to put a plug in here for two tools. It's basically the same tool, except on two different Esri products that will, if people aren't aware, this has been a real game changer for us in Wisconsin, because this can auto create thousands of maps based on certain unique filters that you put in. So if you're using ArcMap, it's called Data Driven Pages. If you're using ArcGIS Pro, it's called Map Series, but it's the same tool. And we use this to create over 6,000 maps every year, updated maps every year. And we basically just let it run overnight, come back the next day, and there's a huge portion of these maps that have been made. And so when someone requests a survey for that musk root near Eau Claire, for example, we can just go into our files and pull the musk root population that they're looking for and send them off in an email, as opposed to them requesting a survey and us having to create those resources on the spot. For data sensitivity, we have a confidentiality form. I think, Gretel, maybe this looks familiar because we stole it from you. Yeah, it's just a document saying I promise not to spill the beans on where these rare plant populations are. It's not legally binding or anything, but we require that everyone sign one who's going on a survey. For people who use iNaturalist, of course, there's geoprivacy, and we request that people set that to obscure to private. We can't control, even though we're running the project, we can't control the geoprivacy settings. So we just ask people to do that themselves. And then I mentioned when I was talking about this rare plant finder tool that we have, the online tool that helps volunteers sign up for surveys. We don't give the precise locations of all these rare plants. They're buffered or generalized to the township level. So that's 6 miles by 6 miles. So, and again, this tool is open to the general public. So anyone who goes onto it, it's helpful to sign up for a survey, but they're not actually going to figure out or find where precisely these things are located. So we're only sharing it to the township level, and the volunteers who want the more precise data have to email us. And that is all I have.
Thanks, Kevin. I have a quick question. So
Yeah.
I wonder, how do you keep track? Like if someone emails you and says, I want to monitor this, like you pull the map, how do you keep track of like which sort of assignments are claimed and which ones are still to be, assigned?
Yeah. We created a very simple access database. So when someone signs up for a survey, we just say, Joe Smith was sent EO. We use EOID, which is a unique identifier for each population. So Joe Smith signed up for EOID 1234, which was small white lady slipper, and then there's boxes for like survey information sent to Joe, and then boxes for like Joe submitted reports. So that, yeah, and that helps this time of year when we're following up with them to say like, hey, Joe, we never got anything from your small white lady slipper survey. Can you, how did that go?
That the Shiny R tool sounds very intriguing. Do you have a Git repository of the code? Do you have that code somewhere?
We do, yeah. We actually had I certainly couldn't have done it myself. A master's student who was working with us created it as part of her master's projects. But I could share that code with you.
All right, thanks, Kevin. That was I hadn't heard of the map series thing. That's super interesting. Very useful. Any other questions? And at this point, I think we can open it up to everybody now that everybody's presented. There's a lot of overlap in what we heard. So if anybody has any sort of greater questions for individuals or the whole group, please feel free. I did have one question for Kristen, and that is when you are dealing with the Fish and Wildlife data, when you're accessing that, is that data updated as they are entering it, or do they update it like once a year? And so you're looking at even when it's entered, it's still a year old or something like that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do know what you mean. They push monthly updates. And so yeah, so they do, and they push that out to like they'll push new GIS files too. So you can like download the whole data set of occurrences for all of the information in the CNDDB. And in theory, they're pushing out monthly updates for that as well.
Okay. Thanks.
I have a question for Kevin. How do you do or manage quality control with your setup, especially with having do your volunteers go through a training as well, I suppose?
Training in like plant ID, you mean? Is that the quality check you're talking about?
Well, I mean, both. Like how do you ensure that your volunteers are giving you good data?
Yeah, well, so part of that, yeah, is the plant ID part, like that they're finding what they're saying they're finding. If they submit on iNaturalist, then they have to submit a photo. But as part of the training, that is one of the requirements that we say you have to submit a photo with your report, whether it's with Survey 123 or iNaturalist, or even if you submit hard copy forms, you would have to email us photos of the plants. Sometimes that's, as I'm sure we're all familiar with working with volunteers, like if people are submitting on the same species year after year, you kind of like, all right, well, this is the 4th year that they've surveyed for this thing. I think they know what I trust that they found it again. That's part of it. We have forms, fields in iNaturalist and of course on Survey 123 that they fill out. They're fairly straightforward. Yeah, everyone does go through a training on how to fill out these forms, but it's pretty basic stuff, like how many plants did you find, what number was in flower and fruit, and what was the associated habitat, and what were threats. A lot of that stuff is like check boxes, bins, 25% impacted by shrubs, 25% impacted by erosion, whatever, 50 to 75% impacted by trails, whatever. Yeah, I think that is one issue I'm sure we're all familiar with, is the people who don't do things by the book, and they send you this kind of loose data. That's always frustrating. And I always struggle with what to do with it. Do I just ignore it because it's going to take longer to process? But then it's like, well, it is data on rare plants, you don't want to just throw it away, even if it takes a little longer to process. So yeah, you just try to reduce the number of people that do that, I guess.
I'm a little curious for people who have their data in-house, how many organizations have a separate data manager than their volunteer coordinator? So I wear both hats and was curious how representative that is for other organizations.
That's how Wisconsin is too, Micah.
We have a GIS person who I think doubles as a data manager in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I have a little bit of backup for volunteer coordination and for you know, development. But I do wear both hats in some cases.
Okay, looking at the time a little bit, it's 2:15. Are there any more questions that we want to throw out here?
David, I just want to put in a plug for Plants of Concerns platform. I know a lot of the presentations talked about using Survey 123, but we have a really good mobile app and you know, interface for volunteers, land managers, whoever you would like to see the data. And you know, we created this as a shareable technology for other programs to use. So if anyone is interested, let me know and I'd be happy to give you a demo.
Great, thanks, Gretel. Have other groups been picking that up?
Some nibbles, but no, no takers yet.
Okay. It is a really good system.
Thanks for that reminder, Gretel. I think that came up during our in-person meetup of this group at the CPC conference in May, and I made a note about it, but I forgot. But we, like I said, are working on like restructuring our program, and so this might be an apt time for us to take a look at all of the options and just, yeah, I'll reach out later.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, well, if everybody's okay with the discussion now, it might be a good time to move on to the best practice manual. Give ourselves a few minutes to chat about that and make some decisions on how we want to move forward with that. Let's see. So I think some things we want to talk about. Let's see. Gretel, can you bring that up, that document? In the email that Gretel had sent out about today, she had shared this sort of nascent outline that we put together. The idea is that we would like to create a resource available to kind of all levels of groups doing this kind of work. And at whatever scales they're doing this kind of work. This work being community science-based rare plant monitoring or survey work. And we would like to have it not just be something that the planning committee as it is trying to write. We would like everybody's input, or as much input as people are willing to give. Including kind of taking part in the actual writing of it. There are a couple of ways this could eventually live. This could live as a document on our website. This could live as a kind of as an entity, a chapter or an entity at the Center for Plant Conservation on their Rare Plant Academy. And their best practices manual could be a kind of a chapter in that. We are likely going to be, we're working on talking with the CPC about putting together a sub-forum topic around the rare plant community science issue. And we would be we would be managing that particular sub-forum, but it could also, this manual could also kind of live there as well. So we don't have any, well, and it could also be printed, although that it seems less an issue these days. But we'd like something that is consumable and available to as many people as possible. So what you see in front of you is what we've come up with so far, what a document like this could look like, how it could flow, how it could be broken down a little bit. You'll see that there's about 8 subtopics or sections, sorry, or chapters, how we would like to think about it. Some of them are broken down further and some of them are not. We kind of did that on purpose, that we wanted to open this up to this group to identify either whole different chapters potentially, if you feel like there's something missing in here, or help fill out some of these subtopics. Another thing that we would like to do is after this meeting, we would like to send out a survey, kind of a call to action, where we will ask people what their interest in being part of this is. Would they like to contribute to the writing? Would they like to be on a team? Is there one particular chapter they would like to be working on? If we don't get any takers, probably what it'll end up looking like is that the planning committee will kind of slowly work its way through this, with a goal of really trying to get it out. And we would then try and reach out to individuals out there that we know have some of this knowledge, but it'll be a much slower process. And not that this has to be done overnight, but the more community-based we can make this, the better. For as kind of a model, for those of you familiar with the CPC's best practice manual, something like that would be great, where we could have a potential for each chapter or section, we could have maybe 1 or 2 organizers, and then a suite of people working on the writing itself, to kind of keep things moving. Yeah, so that gives us about 10-15 minutes here to chat about what we're seeing in front of us. Do any of you have any questions or comments on this at this point? Suggestions, all of that. We can start. You can see somebody's in there. Who is that? Somebody's in there already, starting to type away, or with the ability to type away. So we're hopefully going to be able to take notes live on this document while we're all chatting.
Yeah, I think I'll just chime in after David. I think this is really important as we're seeing kind of a proliferation and increased need for more rare plant community science projects. So trying to help projects not have to reinvent the wheel by showing them different avenues to do each of these kind of bullets. Also, there's been a number of times where we've been talking about different features and products that different programs have created that they can share as open source, and having a repository for that, I think, would be so critical. And I think having that as part of the manual would be important. But ways to support existing programs and to reduce the barriers to entry for future programs, I think, is really critical.
Thank you, Becca.
Yeah, I'll add that, we've talked about a lot of these topics in this network, so, and pulled together resources on the topics. So when we talk about like writing sections, it will be pulling together information that's sort of, we've already, already amassed so far, and also identifying other resources that we can pull from. You know, a lot of maybe sections have been written with, you know, not necessarily a community science angle, but we can take resources that are out there and see how we can sort of use them and or point to them as needed. And I think our other ask was like, what sections are we missing too?
Right. Yes. Thank you. It could be this is a lot to take in. Even though it's one page at this point, it's kind of a lot to think about. A lot of silence out there. I'm hoping that means that people aren't afraid of kind of jumping in on something like this. But yeah, I would imagine that a lot of us might need some time to kind of think about this.
Yeah, that's where I'm at, David. I'll just chime in to at least add another voice here, and I appreciate you all working on this outline. I think you roughly have it captured here, but the biggest thing that comes to mind for me, especially as I'm in the thick of this like program restructuring, is to really, again, with the idea, like Micah was saying, right, the idea being to like reduce barriers of entry for new programs to like get up and get going and like also just be successful. The database, like the thinking about like what your database is, and are you creating your own? What are the pros and cons of managing your own database, or are you leaning on some other existing database, and what are the pros and cons of that? And really thinking about the data architecture. And so again, it's there, but I wanted to just emphasize that piece because I think that is such a significant thing that, again, if we are land managers and we're botanists and we're biologists, like it's not really our wheelhouse always. Like sometimes there's cross, expertise there. But it's a big deal, and just managing and updating databases is a big deal. And I worked with this data architect in my past position who always said something that I appreciated, which is like, think about the end first. Like, what is your output, and how do you want to be able to query your data, and how do you want to be able to look at it and visualize it or report on it? And you like then back into like how you build the structure. That's maybe too much in the weeds for this, but just like it's a real struggle, like figuring it out. And how do you make the whole data flow seamless enough that you're not stuck with a backlog? Because apparently everybody has a huge backlog, and that's the thing. And so I would just emphasize that piece. Like if we can collectively take our knowledge and put it in words on a page, maybe there's not one clean solution, but.
Right. Yeah, that's good. I think a lot of that's kind of I don't want to say the end all be all, but that's kind of where the heart of a lot of this work lies, is in everything flows from it.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, it's kind of obvious. I don't think I'm saying, anything like revolutionary here, but it's just, it's the real core of a lot of the struggles and a lot of the ways things can go really great or have a lot of challenges are centered around just like how that data is collected and entered and QAQC'd and reported out and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Under the volunteer chapter, do we think volunteer retention? Maybe that's obvious, but I don't see it there. But I know that's, whether it's our types of programs or anyone working with volunteers, I feel like retention is always an issue.
Yeah, it's good. That's super important.
Maybe just creating like communications with volunteers.
Mhm.
Yeah, how to communicate.
Yep. Hey, all right, we are coming up on time here. It looks like we're going to be taking a lot of this offline, and that's totally fine. So, like I mentioned, we're going to be sending out a survey, asking about some of these details and participation and ability to participate. So look for that. And then, oh man, I know we've talked about this, and I can't remember, Gretel, Micah, anybody, if you have a better memory of the plan for this moving forward. But I think the hope is to maybe do a little kind of offline organizing between meetings here, and then maybe we will have a discussion, another get together, perhaps in January, where we would discuss this a little more in depth. Does that sound right?
That sounds right. What I
Okay.
remember.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we can get a sense of who's interested by a survey and go from there.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for joining. Thanks to our speakers. Absolutely. It was super interesting. My head's spinning a little bit. There's a lot that I was trying to write down. But yeah, thank you everybody for showing up, and look forward to hearing from you as we kind of move forward on best practices. And we'll also figure out, did we have another topic set up for a January meeting, or was this kind of it?
I don't know of any future meetings that we have planned already.
Right. So this one will be kind of it. We'll focus on the best practice manual. So hopefully, at least by that point, we'll have a few people kind of assigned, or we'll have a better plan going forward. But in the meantime, if you do have, even absent the survey or separate from the survey, if there's information you want to send to us about this, thoughts, ideas, suggestions, advice, please do so, and we'll try to take it all in as we try and get this thing organized.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for having me. Sorry I was late.
It's okay.
Thanks, everyone.